This is Jessica Taylor interviewing John Chambers on August 31st, 2013. And Mr. Chambers, can you please state your full name?
John V. Chambers.
And where were you born?
St. Petersburg, Florida.
And when was that?
1948.
Okay. Did you grow up in a military family?
No.
No. What did your parents do?
My father worked for the Coca-Cola Company, and my mom was a secretary.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this, but did you join the armed forces?
Yes, I did.
Mm-hmm. What branch?
Army.
And how did you join?
Went down to the recruiter's office and signed my name.
So you enlisted?
Yes.
What led to that decision?
Oh, lots and lots of things. I think that at that time, that was 1966, and the atmosphere in the town I lived in was not, no one disbelieved the government or thought in any way that the government would deceive someone. And there was no protest against the war where I lived. So I just, it was the post-World War II generation. My father had been in World War II, and I just did what people told me was what young men did. Mm-hmm. You went in the Army. As a matter of fact, if you applied for a job at the time, they always said, have you done your military service? Because it was an issue.
Right. So was your family supportive of your entrance into the military? Yes,
but my mother wouldn't sign. She had to sign. I was 17, and she wouldn't sign unless I signed for an extra year and went to Germany instead of Vietnam.
And you agreed?
Yes.
Wow. What led her to sort of pull rank?
I don't know. I guess she didn't want me to go to Vietnam.
That makes sense. Where did you go to boot camp?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
What was that like for you?
It was eye-opening. I was just a middle-class kid from a relatively small city, and it was intense, really intense. But I was prepared for it. I knew pretty much what to expect. And
if you don't mind me asking, how did you know what to expect?
Because I spent most of my afternoons before I graduated from high school at the recruiter's office talking to him, asking him questions, and just.
You were really that excited, huh?
Well, I wanted to be in the military. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Describe the training that you received at boot camp and
after. Standard turn a civilian into a soldier, basic training, and then when I went to advanced infantry training, is turn that soldier into an infantry soldier.
Mm-hmm. So did you, what was your military occupation specialty? Was that infantry?
Infantry.
Okay, great. Did the training you received apply effectively once you were in Vietnam?
I went to Germany first, and I did a lot of training there, and I think the training was good. What they specifically train you for, you don't always necessarily do. But what they do is they convert you from a civilian to a soldier, and what that means is that you learn how to do what you're told to do, no matter how ridiculous it may seem. And that, in the end, is it's the discipline and the willingness to do what you're told.
So you changed personally is kind of maybe what I'm reading into that.
Oh, I definitely did.
How so?
Well, I went to Vietnam as a Spec 4, Specialist 4th Class. Most of the guys who went to Vietnam had just gone through training, went right to Vietnam. They were PFCs, and they had no Army experience. So as my tour went on, I became a buck sergeant, a Sergeant E5. And that's where the change happened. Because at that point, you start to internalize the values that are required to be in a war and tell people what to do. You can't tell people to do something if you don't think they ought to do it. so that you internalize this sense of the values that the Army has, and you
Okay.
make a big change right there.
Right. Was there a moment of reckoning for you in Vietnam once you got past your training? And
What do you mean by reckoning?
I guess when you made a decision that a soldier would make instead of a citizen.
No, I pretty much did what a soldier was supposed to do the whole
Right.
time. It's just when I became responsible, that's when it changed a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before, as just a guy in the platoon, I could say, "Damn, why do we have to do that? Jeez, piss and moan all I want." But when I became a sergeant, then I had to tell them, "This is what we're going to do," and I couldn't say, "Damn."
Right.
You have to, you change right there.
Absolutely. So describe your first impressions of the camp once you got to Vietnam,
What camp would that be?
wherever the heck
Well,
you were
I
stationed.
came into a reception station
Uh-huh.
where they disseminate you to other places, which would be the unit you're going to actually be with. I went to my unit, and they had a training thing you had to go through for a week, where they taught you specific things, and then you would be taken out to your unit. So I was only in a camp for a short time.
Mm-hmm. Where were you stationed in Vietnam after that?
All over, mostly in the south, of course, but around the Mekong Delta, over toward Cambodia, the Parrot's Beak, down around Saigon, Cho Lan, and the pineapple groves southwest of Saigon.
Okay.
You couldn't say that, well, I was stationed at, first of all, they didn't consult me, and secondly, most of the places we were in the middle of nowhere, as far as I was concerned. So.
Mm-hmm. And as far as combat goes, how did you understand the rules of engagement?
When it's time to shoot, you shoot, and there weren't any rules that I recollect. I always hear about that, but I was never in a position where they said, well, don't shoot here or don't do this. Shooting started, you shoot.
Okay. Were there specific moments that stick out to you?
Well, I was in one very major firefight in May of '68. They referred to that as Little Tet. And we were ambushed by a battalion-sized group of North Vietnamese. It lasted 3 days, 3 nights. I got no sleep and just constant combat. And we lost about half of our unit. So we were effectively not effective anymore. They took us to a fire base where they brought in replacements and all that. But that was the friends I'm in touch with. Everybody remembers that.
Right. And I'm sure you knew some of the people that were lost personally.
Oh yeah.
What was it, and this may be an odd question, I'm just interested, what is it like to regroup with replacements, basically?
Very nervous. A new guy, we call him an FNG, that's the fucking new guy. New guys are not, you don't want to be around new guys. They make mistakes. They get scared, like everybody does, but when they get scared, they're gonna maybe look for somebody to be next to, and that makes you a target. Or maybe they'll freeze, and you never know how somebody's gonna react. And if they're in a position where they need to be doing what they're doing and they freeze, well, that's trouble. So if you got a unit that's a lot of replacements, it's like, oh my God, I'm not gonna make it out of here.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that was sort of the opposite of what I might have expected, not knowing anything.
I know when I was an FNG, it's the loneliest feeling in the world.
How long did it take you to graduate to?
As soon as you get into some kind of contact, some kind of battle, and you prove yourself, then things start to loosen up.
Wow. Wow. And I think I understand you were wounded.
Yes.
Would you mind talking about that?
No. We were on a search and destroy southwest of Saigon, or no, actually it was east of Long Binh, and we were crossing a stream, and there was a lot of elephant grass and bush ahead of us, and we went up a little hill and we started taking fire, so we all went down, and I went down on a punji stick right there, and went in just above my knee, right there, and came out my hip. And I couldn't go anywhere. I was frozen there, and they were shooting. And the medic came over and broke me off of the stick so I could get down. That was a good thing. I could get closer to the ground. Yeah, so that's what happened.
Oh my Lord. And that's its own separate sort of rules of engagement on the half of the Viet Cong. Do you think that any kind of standard of behavior would have changed the outcome?
No.
No.
No. What the problem with war and combat is you gotta stop it before it starts. Once it's going, rules are just ridiculous. Nobody follows them, even if you have them. It's just you just become, it's very basic. It's survival, and you'll do whatever it takes to survive.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other moments that you'd like to be recorded about your on-the-ground experience in Vietnam?
During that firefight, I fired a lot of light anti-tank weapons. They're called LAWs. It's a 66 millimeter rocket that you fire out of a fiberglass tube, and then the tube is discarded. So I kind of became known as the guy that fired the LAWs, because I fired a bunch of them that day. Actually, I'm written up in a book. It's called Days of Valor by Tonsetic, who was a company commander in my unit, about that firefight.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, as a wounded veteran, did you receive decorations as a result of your
Just a
service?
Purple Heart and a regular.
Just a Purple Heart.
Well, you know, I like to call it's the enemy sharpshooter badge. You're not supposed to get wounded. Why do they give you an award when you do? I'm not real sure.
So you had mixed feelings about it.
I'm proud of it, but you know, I'm not. It's not like I'm. You know, it's a Purple Heart. It means I got wounded, and that's all it means.
I take that you didn't discard your medal.
No.
No.
Well, I wasn't in Washington to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
When did you come back?
I came back in 1969, and I was still in the Army. I did another year in the Army in Colorado.
Mm-hmm. So what, just a kind of before and after comparison, what was your opinion of the war in Vietnam before you went?
I was very much, I can't really say I was in favor of it, but I felt that it was necessary, and that's what I'd been told. And I believed in the government, and I would never dream that the government would do something that was not in my interest. I knew that there was a risk, but it seemed everybody was saying it's necessary, so that's how I felt. And I felt that way right through. I know in Colorado, I had a real hard time with adjustment, even still in the Army. That's when I had post-traumatic stress big. I was drunk constantly, and couldn't have cared less about anything. And it was only after I got out of the Army and I went to school, I continued to support the cause in Vietnam and all these things, but I started to get challenged about why. And when I realized that, gee, doesn't everybody know why? And I had to think about, well, why? And I started to investigate. That's when I realized that I think I've been lied to here.
So before you started second guessing, what did you think that the reason that the United States was in that war?
To help the Vietnamese be free, South Vietnamese people.
Okay. When you first got back and when you were in Colorado, what year was that again?
69.
69.
Yeah.
What was your reception like amongst civilians, amongst your family?
I don't recollect in any particular. It wasn't bad.
Okay.
But it wasn't. A lot of people that I knew before I went in the Army would see me and say, gee, where have you been? I haven't seen you in a long time. And that blew me away. It's like, not that they necessarily had to know where I was, but when they'd say that, my mind would scream back across the past 4 years. A year in combat, a year in Germany, the Cold War, and it just seemed like, what have you been doing for the past 4 years?
Right. It's a totally different life trajectory.
Yeah, it really, and that was also a funny thing about post-traumatic stress too. When you've been through those things, and the people that you knew before haven't, it's really hard to. What happens is you separate yourself from society because you have nothing in common with them. You can't relate to them, and your whole life is life and death, and theirs is what am I wearing to work, and you just can't relate to them.
Right.
And they can't relate to you.
Yeah. What was your relationship like with your family after?
It was all right.
It's all right.
I wouldn't say that, when I was having trouble, they weren't very encouraging because nobody knew what post-traumatic stress was then. They just said, well, forget about it. Just try to forget about it, which was well-intentioned, but it ain't going to happen. Just forget about it.
If you don't mind me asking, how did you pull yourself out of that place?
I haven't. I have learned to deal with it. You don't get over it. What you do is you learn to go around it, accept it for what it is, and try to incorporate it in what you're doing and move on.
Yeah. So, aggregately speaking, you have this really diverse military experience that basically spans the globe. How does it change your view of Vietnam and the Vietnam War from before to after?
Well, the Pentagon Papers is what really hit me.
Okay.
When I read the Pentagon Papers, I was overwhelmed. I was, for a while, destroyed because that's when I started to realize that this wasn't what I was told, and this isn't what I thought it was all about. And why would the government do this? I was just, I was such a sucker when I was 17. I believed in all these, I just believed with it was blind obedience kind of. You just, oh yeah, well. And then all of a sudden to find out that they had used that. They had used what who I was in the doing the war, and I thought they had used everybody else too. That was upsetting.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, you've defined yourself as a soldier,
Mm-hmm.
and part of a soldier's duty is to do what the government says. So.
Right. Yeah. I did. As long as I was a soldier, I did exactly what they told me to do.
And now you're not a soldier and you have the ability to doubt.
Right.
Where are you coming from? What's your new identity?
Right. But I still, and part of the post-traumatic stress is, and what I tell them at the VA is, I feel like a soldier in the midst of a bunch of civilians. Now, politically, with the war and all those things, I've changed a lot. But I haven't changed from being a soldier. I'm prepared for disaster. I'm not waiting for it. I'm not hoping it's coming, but if it comes, I will be prepared.
Wow.
Because you have to be. I have been through so many experiences. When something happens, there's no music that builds up to it. There's no, when you see a movie, there's this, they build everything to this, and then boom, it all. That doesn't happen in real life. If somebody walks into this house and starts shooting somebody, it's happening now, and that's what a soldier's trained to do: react to the unexpected. And you guys are liabilities. You might cause my death. That's the FNG thing.
Absolutely. It's just an interesting. You just kind of gave me a perspective into your mind and how you're even looking at the layout
I've
of this house.
thought about this a lot across 40 years.
Absolutely. When you joined pretty early, probably before.
66.
Yeah, before the peace movement.
3 years after Kennedy was killed, and what happened in '65? Something. Well, the Marines went to Vietnam in '65. That was the beginning of the buildup. I went in '66, but I went to Germany, and then in '67 and '68, I went to Vietnam. And that's when the big, I went with 200,000 other people in early '68.
Right. What was your original sort of perspective on people that were opposed to the war, peace activists?
Just like everybody else in my unit, we just couldn't wait to get home and get to them.
Get to them? What were some of the things that you would say?
Well, I can't wait to get home and get my hands on one of those protesters.
Okay. What was the logic there?
Well, the logic is you've been trained to be a soldier and you've been trained to hate the enemy. Somebody who is opposing you is the enemy. The logical conclusion is you hate them.
Wow.
And that's something, a perspective on that for today. They should never ask people in the military what they think of a war. They've been trained to do it. They want to do it. And they might hedge that or try to disguise it by saying, well, I don't think war's really right. But they've spent these years being trained for it. They're supposed to be ready and be ready to do it. So their opinion is tainted.
So it takes more than a 180 for you to join activism. It's a personality changing thing.
What it took for me was I was really pissed off, and I was doing the same thing that they'd trained me to do. I got pissed off, and now I'm going to fight.
Okay, but you can't fight with.
Well, you couldn't fight physically or in that way, but you can fight by telling people what it was really all about. And trying to oppose it.
So when did you become involved with the VVAW?
Right around 71.
71.
I became the chapter coordinator in St. Petersburg.
Okay.
And what I did was, there was only one of me. I set up a little table outside the student union and passed out literature, and I got a couple of guys involved, and then I applied to the Veterans Council in St. Petersburg to allow the Vietnam veterans against the war to march in the Veterans Parade. And of course they went ballistic trying to tell us no. And I went to the newspaper with that and I said, look, I'm a veteran. I'm honorably discharged. I have a Purple Heart. I have an opinion. And we have formed a veterans group, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and we want to march in the parade, but they won't let us. And it just went. The day after that, I had like 30 or 40 members. Like the VVA or the VFW and the American Legion really kind of built the chapter down in St. Petersburg.
Wow. And I understand because the Pentagon Papers were released in 1971, and this is the same exact time. Yeah. Did that affect?
Yeah, that was it for me.
Yeah. And that, I'm sure, was it for other people?
I'm sure it was. I mean, if you read it, I don't see how you could ignore it.
Right. Yeah. Did you notice that the motives of the other veterans were different from yours, or were they very similar?
Some people just didn't really understand it all, but they felt that it was all wrong, and they just wanted to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same in any organization.
Yeah. Did you ever testify in front of Congress?
No.
No. Okay.
I lobbied in front of Congress.
You did?
Not in front of, but in the halls of Congress. Going from, I went with a whole bunch of people to lobby for a bill. It was called the Gravel-Drinan bill to cut off funds for the war. And there was a bunch of us in D.C. And what we did was we got a campsite in Greenbelt Park. And during the day, half of us would lobby our congressman, and the other half would panhandle to get food for that night. And the American Friends Service Committee allowed us to eat and cook in their kitchen. So it was a big, long day.
When was that?
I can't remember.
Okay.
It must have been around 71 or 72,
71?
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Big year.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see a divide between the the VVAW between North and South chapters?
I didn't detect any.
No.
That's another thing about organizations. There's always some kind of political crap that goes on behind, on top, beside, through, because they're normal personalities,
Right.
Some people are very opinionated and they're very strong-willed and controlling. Some people aren't. And so it's no different in that than it is in any other organization.
Were there any key dividing factors within the organization, or was
Not
it
that
just...
I saw, because in Florida we were all pretty much in agreement.
Right.
I would go from St. Pete up here to Gainesville, and we'd have meetings, and we'd talk about what we were going to do, and there would be comments, and we'd all talk about what happened.
Were you involved in any other groups besides this one?
Well, in St. Petersburg, we had a group called Sunshine Resistance, and it was made up of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War and 2 other groups, and we kind of put together and had a storefront.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was the atmosphere like there?
It was great. Those times were just, when you're on your own and you're righteous, man, there isn't anything better than that. I mean, it's just riding the crest of the wave.
When did you first meet Scott Camille?
Oh, one of my trips up here my first trip. Up here in the old VVAW house, which was at University Avenue and 8th Street maybe, or somewhere in there. It's torn down now, it's a parking lot. But
that probably wasn't your first visit to Gainesville, was it?
I think, no, it wasn't. I came here before I went to Vietnam with some friends.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What was the atmosphere like at UF and at the VVAW house then?
I don't really know then, because I wasn't going to school. I didn't really have anything to do with the university, so other than who might have been in the group. But the university was, from my perspective, really kind of irrelevant, because I did all my stuff in St. Petersburg. I came up here, we had group meetings for the state, and whatever they did up here, they got involved with the university.
Yeah. So tapping into students here wasn't as
Not
big
here.
of a deal as it was
tapping into students there.
Right. Great. So in 1971, 1972, what methods did you think would lead to change and be effective?
Well, I believed then, and I still do believe, that you can't preach to the choir. You got to go to the enemy and bring the fight to the enemy. So we would do things like we leafleted a Veterans of Foreign Wars convention at a big hotel downtown, and of course there were a lot of opinions expressed there. But that's the kind of thing you got to do. You can't slap each other on the back and say, yeah, we're all against the war. You got to go to the people who think it's right and convince them it's not.
Mr. Hudgens was talking about his experience speaking with a World War II veteran that felt very differently. Was that your experience speaking with an older generation?
Absolutely.
What's that difference like?
Well, the difference is, just like for me in the post-World War II atmosphere, the government's right. And these guys had been through a war where we had been attacked and there was a clear enemy. And they were, they believed that this is the way you conduct yourself. And they took that right through, so that there wasn't any reason for them to not believe that.
That's really sad. As far as being a chapter head and then coming to Gainesville and working with Scott Camille, did you have any sense that there were government agents that had infiltrated? Oh,
yeah. As a matter of fact, when I went to Washington to do the bill, the lobbying, I brought a guy back, and I called Scott. I doubt that he remembers this, it's so insignificant, but I brought this guy back, and I talked to Scott, and he said, I think he might be an informant. So I took him to my house and let him live at my house with me, because, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. We had control then about what he knew. And we told him all kinds of crap. It was, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to do this. And then after a while, I just got tired of it and threw him out.
This was in Gainesville?
No, this was in St. Pete.
This is in St. Petersburg. Um,
And the other thing that was interesting to me is one time I was driving down the road and I picked this guy up. You know, hitchhikers were prevalent then. Everybody hitchhiked. Picked this guy up. He gets in my car and he says, "I got a 50 caliber machine gun and I want to sell it." And I'm thinking, well, this is unusual. You don't pick up a guy every day that has a 50 caliber machine gun. And I said, well, that's nice, but I have no use for that. And I let him out 2 or 3 blocks. And all kinds of little things like that would happen out of nowhere. It made you suspicious, you know.
yeah. Ugh.
I kept telling people, and people in the chapter, you know, this is a peace organization. We're trying to bring war to an end. We're not interested in 50 caliber machine guns. Those days are over now. So.
Were there members that had trouble accepting that?
Mm-mm.
No, everybody.
But
Was
they
on the
would
same
fall
page?
into it, you know. They'd fall into that because you're pissed off. You want to fight, and people would forget that we're not fighting in that way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But there was never any trouble.
Mm-mm. So in 1971, 1972, what were your feelings about President Richard Nixon?
Well, I thought he was a sleazeball,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and my understanding of things now shows indicates that he really was a sleazeball. You know, he got elected on the idea that he had a plan to get us out of Vietnam, and during his enactment of that plan, more soldiers, more U.S. soldiers died than under any other president. Certainly more Vietnamese died. And it was just so coincidental that his plan started to come to fruition just when the election started to happen. And for that, that's just...
And Watergate comes very shortly after that. How did you feel about that?
I thought, yeah, get him.
That's fair. So did you have any grand plans for the Republican National Convention?
We got together here in Gainesville with the infamous meeting, and my job was to go back to St. Petersburg and develop a plan to support 2,000 veterans as they came to Florida. That's what I was told. So I was lining up a place for them to stay, food for them to eat, because we were going to stage. You know, you don't just come haphazardly in. You know, people kind of get together in convoys, join up, and then they come in, stop in St. Pete, eat, rest, and then go to the convention in a big group. So I went to the police and I said, this is what's going to happen. 2,000 vets are coming to town. And we don't want any trouble. We just want to stay here and then go to the convention. So I'd like your cooperation, like a little bit of help. And I was amazed at how much they helped me. They really helped me. It was only after when the Gainesville Eight thing happened, I started to realize why. They didn't, oh yeah, we can take care of that, no problem. They were just drawing us into the trap.
Yeah. Before the Gainesville Eight were arrested, what did you know everything about what the VVAW was planning? You were pretty...
I knew what they were planning, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'd come to all the meetings.
Mm-hmm. And then were you harassed or arrested or otherwise harmed by the police?
No.
Or the feds?
They came, I had a little apartment on an alley behind a 3 or 4 story hotel, old hotel. And I worked for the newspaper, and I was a copy boy, and I would come home late at night, and the security guard for the hotel would come out the back door, and he was a vet, and we'd shoot the breeze for 10, 15 minutes. One night I pulled up, and he came out and he said, I don't know what's going on, but up on the 2nd floor right over the alley here, they got all kinds of equipment in there, and I think they're watching you. And I said, holy shit. Whoa! I had no clue why. Because I didn't think the VVAW was, why are they watching me? What have I done? So that was the beginning. And what I'd do is I'd call my friends on the phone and I'd read the Bible to them. if they're tapping my phone, I'm going to give them a lot to listen to.
Yeah.
So I'd read the Bible, say all kinds of nice things. You know, I had no clue what was happening. Then a friend of mine needed to go to New York City, and he asked me if I would take him there in my car, and we'd only be there for the weekend and come right back. I said, sure. So we go to New York. He does whatever he's doing. We get back in the car, and he's got 2 lady friends with him. We drive back to St. Pete, and one of the girls is going to stay at my house. Well, come to find out, she's 16. And that's when the FBI arrived at my door with a subpoena. And I thought, I've just transported a minor across 5 or 6 state lines. Oh, I'm dead. And they gave me this subpoena. And I had no idea. I thought it was, you know, that they'd been watching me, and they finally found me doing something. But that wasn't it at all. I called Scott in Gainesville, and he said, well, you're the 15th person that's called in.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of it.
Absolutely. And then what happens next?
Well, none of us knew anything. We didn't know why. You're not entitled to know why a grand jury's been called. So we all came, everybody came to Gainesville, and then we went en masse over to the grand jury. And it wasn't until they started asking questions that we started to be able to put this together. And myself and 3 other guys were the first ones in. And we all refused to testify. That was our only defense, was to stick together and just keep your mouth shut until you find out what's going on. And that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun, too. It was a lot of fun.
Get to upset some...
I don't know if I upset anybody, but I sure tried. You know, we'd go into you sit in the grand jury, and there's this jury out there, and there's this whole line of the U.S. attorneys, and they're asking you questions, and what the attorneys told me to do, and what I did was to find the foreman, and I would talk to the foreman. I didn't talk to the attorneys. Mm-hmm. And I would tell the foreman that on advice of attorney, I refused to answer this question based on several different amendments. Mm-hmm. And then they would ask me 10 or 15 questions. I'd try to remember them, and then go back outside when they'd let me to confer with my attorney. Mm-hmm. And then they'd write all the questions down. Then I go back in, they'd ask me 10 or 15 more. Mm-hmm. That went on for a day or so.
Wow.
It was fun, though, because I was really defiant. I was doing everything I could to non-verbally tell that attorney that he could just kiss my ass.
And this is happening inside the context of the Harrisburg 7, the Camden 28.
Yeah, all those.
Yeah.
It was a grand jury system.
Right. And so how did you feel about the other sort of attacks on peace groups?
Well, I wasn't really aware until we got attacked that this was a tactic being used. You know, another one of my naive things about the law and the courts, and I thought, really, they're doing that? And you know, I tell a lot of people now, when the grand jury system is one of those things. This is why you have to be careful when you give someone power. The grand jury system was initiated to get after organized crime back in the 30s, 20s, whenever it happened. And everybody thought that was great. Nobody wanted organized crime to be murders and all this stuff. Let's get them. So they did the grand jury system and attacked the organized crime. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is the power's there. Now, Richard Nixon comes in, and he uses that legal tactic to attack all these groups. And when you're a fly by the seat of your pants organization and you get accused by the government, then all of your energy goes into defending yourself instead of what you had been doing.
Mm. So after you're questioned and you start to confer with your legal team, what happens next?
Well, they went through several legal maneuvers. There were several hearings in front of this judge, and then finally they had the final hearing, which was to give us immunity. But when they give you immunity, they don't give you immunity. They give you use immunity. which means they can't use what you say against you, but they can use what somebody else says. It's a convenient way to go around the Fifth Amendment. So, and then of course we continued to refuse to testify and slam her.
Yeah. And you were in Tallahassee for 4 days?
Well, I can't remember. In jail, you mean?
Yeah.
I was in jail for 40 days.
Oh. Whoops.
The grand jury thing took maybe 4 days. I don't know.
Yeah.
3, 4, whatever it was.
What was jail like?
It was great. At first, they put us in with the general population, and we caused so much trouble. First, they let us out because we had an appeal. We were in for like 5 days in the general population, and then we got out. We were out for 2 or 3 days, and they said, "Oh, you got to go back." So we all went back, and then they put us in a different place. They put us in a slammer, which is no bars. It's just a steel room with a door with a triangular kind of window in it that you can see the hallway. But we were all 4 in there, and we had a great time. We caused a lot of trouble. We slept all day, and we sang all night, and all kinds of revolutionary kinds of songs. We had the guy across the hall singing with us.
When you were in with the general population, what kind of problems were you causing with them?
Well, the first thing that happened was some guy, very friendly, "Hey, what are you guys here for?" And la-di-da-di-da. And I saw one of the other inmates saying, and I realized they'd put somebody in there with us to try to draw some, and you see that on the news all the time. So-and-so said that so-and-so said. So that's the first thing that happened. But we started a food strike. Everybody quit eating on that cell block. And that was going on. And you know, we put a lot of food on the floor right outside the cell. You know, kind of, "I don't want this crap. Fried bologna on Friday night sucks."
And you got other people to participate.
Yeah.
How did you manage to do that?
Well, they were all pissed at the authorities, and we told them what was happening and why we were there, and on, and that was our job. That's what we did, you know.
Yeah.
And we did it successfully because we were the ones who lasted, I guess.
Right. Wow. So you're in for 40 days on and off.
Mm-hmm. No, 5 days out, back in for 35.
Okay, got it. So after this month and a half or so, you come before the court again?
No, our attorneys went to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And Justice Douglas said that we had to be given bail before the whole thing was decided.
Okay.
And that's when the judge said, "Well, screw this. There's no sense in putting somebody in jail for contempt for not talking and then give them bail." So he just kind of, as I understand it, he just said, "No, screw it."
Wonderful.
But I thought the process was really kind of fun. It was August 9th. That's my birthday. That's when they found us guilty of contempt. It's also the day that Richard Nixon resigned. So every time my birthday comes around, I make sure nobody forgets this. But we knew we were going to get jailed, so we went on a lunch break, and we went to this little bar restaurant, and I just told the girl that was waiting on the bar, "Keep this glass full." And I was putting down beer just as fast as I could drink it. And when we went back, we were all just 12 sheets to the wind, laughing, and the judge sentenced us. You know, I don't even remember him sentencing us. I remember them taking us out and putting us in this holding cell. And then I said to the other 3 guys, I said, "Shit, it's my birthday." And then they took us out in chains, and somebody told me I'd been on the NBC Nightly News and shuffling out to the car, and chained us in the car. That was, when they locked me in that jail, I felt like they were locking themselves outside. Because like I say, when you're righteous, you know you're right. It does. You got nothing to lose.
And the press can sometimes be favorable towards peace groups like yours, and especially in moments where you have a lot of support because you're a Vietnam vet. How important is it to you and to other members of this group that people see what you're doing?
Then,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it was important. It was important for us. The first thing that happened when we go to Congress to lobby, all the congressmen would say, these aren't vets. These aren't veterans. So we started wearing our DD-214 pinned to our shirt, you know, and proving that we were.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to, you know, publicly deny us.
Right.
There was a lot of that.
Right.
And the next thing, you know, a lot of vets, old vets, would call us communists.
Mm-hmm.
You communists! Blah, blah. I'm not a communist.
Yeah.
I'm a concerned citizen, and I'm doing what every citizen should do. So.
When did you first hear your group described as the Gainesville Eight?
I don't remember. I don't remember when that happened.
Okay. And did you know any of the government agents, like, I'll just list them off and you can tell me. Vincent Hannard, Pablo Fernandez, William Kohler, Carl Becker, Emerson Poe, or William Lemmer?
Emerson Poe, I think he lived out in Archer, and I met him once. Lemmer was at the meeting in Gainesville, the big meeting, so I met him. I wouldn't say I know him. And there was one other one. Read those names again. One name rings a bell. But
Vincent Hannard, Pablo Fernandez, William Kohler, Carl Becker?
No, William Kohler is the name. It rings a bell. I don't know why.
Yeah, yes.
So
Okay. So what do you remember about William Lemmer specifically?
He seemed like an asshole. He was
Cool.
He would say a lot of things that were just bizarre. And of course, there was discussion like, shut the fuck up, you know, that's a conspiracy.
And then it comes back kind of full circle during the trial, and he becomes.
Yeah.
What did you think about the prosecutor who was brought in?
I hated all those guys. I just thought these people are hitmen for the government. They know what they're doing. They know that they aren't prosecuting somebody for an illegal crime. They're prosecuting somebody for Richard Nixon. And I thought, I wish that I was back in the Army and one of those guys came into my platoon. I'd just have his ass. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe somebody would actually put on a suit and tie, stand up in court and do this. It's like, what kind of sleazebag are you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an environment where there are a lot of rules of engagement.
Oh, they set it up big. I mean, everything is there to intimidate the hell out of you. You have to walk in there having kind of bolstered yourself up to tell them to go fuck off, because everything is there to crush you down.
Yeah, yeah. And you're coming at this also with the new personality of a soldier on the path of righteousness.
Right, and that was also one of the reasons that they wanted to get us. We were organized. We were veterans, and so their vision of this was we were a military organized group, and we were causing trouble. That's why I tell people now, if you want something to change and you're involved in politics, if you're not getting in trouble, you're being ineffective.
That's fair.
You can scream all you want, but until you found out a way for that screaming to be effective, you're not doing anything. And the only way you know it's going to be effective is when the people you're screaming at come after you.
At the beginning of this case, did you think that they would find you innocent?
I had no idea.
You had no idea?
I thought that this was bad because it just, obviously, they were trumping up a lot of stuff. And when you're on that railroad line, and it seems like it's going right to jail.
Right. What was the court day like? What key moments stand out to you during the trial?
The beginnings, when we gather up in the front. I was loaded most of the time, so I have very few memories of that.
Do you remember the witnesses being brought up?
No.
No.
No. I remember Lemmer coming up, and but I don't really remember a lot of. I wasn't being tried at that point.
Right.
So I was kind of in and out. I was having a good time.
What do you remember about Lemmer's testimony?
It was just bizarre. It was just a lot of crap.
Okay.
Obviously, I mean, I'm thinking this guy's lying through his teeth.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what are you going to do?
Right. And with these fancy prosecutors, why did you think that they were found innocent in the end?
Who was found innocent?
The Gainesville Eight, yeah.
Well, the strength of our judicial system is also its weakness. It's the jury system. And the jury didn't buy it. As well they shouldn't have. And that was it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we virtually didn't even really present a case. It was all the government's witnesses and the cross-examination and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And the jury didn't buy it. History.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell people now, with this, with the Trayvon Martin situation, you can agree or disagree with the jury, but the jury listens to the evidence and they decide. They're just regular people just like everybody. Some of them are smart, some of them aren't. That's the strength and the weakness. So.
Do you think that it would have been different anywhere else then, or is it just the nature of the concept of the jury itself?
Well, it's the jury system. It's, you get a chance there. You're talking to regular people now. You're not talking to attorneys.
Right.
And they get to decide whether this is right or not.
Mm-hmm. So after y'all were found innocent, what political activities did you continue with?
I stayed with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, but I didn't do too much.
No.
No. At one point, I thought the FBI was chasing me, and a girlfriend and I hitchhiked out to California trying to stay clear of them. We ended up on the People's Union Co-op farm, a 40-acre onion farm. It's a lot of fun.
That's wonderful. I love that. You were already pretty angry to begin with, but did this case, the trial in particular, and how it was sort of farcical, change your ideas about how the federal government or the justice system?
Oh, it changed my idea of the justice system. First I thought it was all crooked. This is just obviously of course. Look what they did in Vietnam, and why wouldn't they be doing that in our justice system? But after a while, after several years, I started to realize that that's true everywhere. There's nothing new about manipulation of the justice system. It's happened in our country forever. It happens everywhere else too. It's just one of the flaws. There isn't any perfect thing that always works just right. Mm-hmm. And so after quite a few years, I've come to really feel that our legal system, we don't have a justice system. The legal system, there's an assumption that if there's an adversarial thing between the defense and the prosecution, that ultimately the truth will come out and justice will be done. But that's only an assumption. It's not an absolute. So I think under our system, you get justice more often. You don't always get it, but.
Yeah. And kind of in that vein, how do you remember the end of the war in Vietnam that you were
was devastating. I remember seeing it on TV, and just a lot of emotion came out of me. Just, it was a release of some kind, and it was hard.
I would have assumed, not to push back, that you would.
Well, a lot of things were involved in that war for me. Being in it, fighting against it, and all of a sudden, it's over. It's just, it's a reality that is difficult to accept without the outpouring of some emotion.
Okay. And a lot of parallels have been drawn between y'all's political activism and then Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. Do you see parallels between your generation and ours?
There were some, but basically we were a group, an organization of people who had been affected by and traumatized by the war. And that was our major thrust. And so that's a big difference between the other people. The other thing is, I'm not sure if this happened, I don't know what Snowden's really doing, but we went by the legal system. I knew when I refused to testify, I was going to jail. I didn't protest that. It's the rule. You know, you don't talk, they find you guilty, jail. You know, whatever you do, you have to realize that there's always a consequence of some kind. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's neutral, or sometimes it's bad, but there is a consequence. You have to accept that. And I think Americans sometimes lose sight of that. Not that people shouldn't protest, but I'm wondering, you know, if somebody really thinks it's wrong, why are they hiding? Stand up and shove the papers in somebody's face, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, if the multitude of people who had gone to Canada during the Vietnam War, if every one of those people stood up and said, I'm not going, but I will go to jail, the jails would have filled up and that war would have ended a lot sooner. But since they went to Canada, the government was able to say, there's just not very many. It's just a few people that are, you know, whatever.
Right, right.
So they took, I think they took the coward's way out. Because I know a lot of people who refused induction. David Harris out in California, you know, refused induction, did 24 months in federal prison. Those people are that takes some guts.
Yeah. So what would you want your legacy to be?
My legacy.
Your legacy.
I want to be left alone. That's what I want on my. I want my tombstone to say, "Go away."
That's okay. So what if we were to say, what do you want the Gainesville Eight legacy to be?
I would like it to be looked at as a part of American history that. Where we were effective and we did the right thing for the right reason. But I don't believe that's going to happen. I think my personal view now is I'm homesteading and I'm extracting myself from American society as much as possible. I rarely go anywhere. This is a rarity for me to be here. I work at my place. I eat. When I'm tired, I sleep. I get up in the morning and I do what I do. And I've eliminated the sense of Monday through Friday. The weekends are meaningless to me now. It's like, it's what I do, you know. I think it's a problem in our American society where we have gotten to the point where we go to do a job that is whatever it is, and then we get paid for it. And then we take that pay and exchange it for this, that, and the other thing. And then we have this concept of the weekend, vacation. All these things are just, I've rejected them. And the other thing, and I'm going to run on a little bit here, but I don't like it when I hear people who are involved in the environment and trying to protect it. Those same people get on a plane and fly to Europe or fly wherever they fly to have a vacation, visit the kids. When you do that, you're putting CO2 into the atmosphere at 30,000 feet, which is exactly where you don't want it to happen. But they justify this saying, well, I'm really doing la-di-da-di-da, and there's, you know, I compensate by riding a bicycle. You can't compensate tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's not happening. So I think American society has got a cancer, and it runs through the whole society. And I don't think that cancer is going to get cured. It's going to have to run its course. And in the running its course, there's going to be some hard times.
Okay. You know, that's really all my questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to discuss?
You can't think of anything else?
Anything else?
Now, let me ask you a question or two. Why are you doing what you're doing?
Do you want me to answer that while that's going, or do you?
Will, do you want to just close the interview out?
It's Jessica Taylor closing the interview.